There is a moment, one single moment, that still lives in the memory of anyone who saw it in real time. Not a knockout, not a championship belt raised into the air, not a roaring crowd on its feet in a packed arena. This moment is quieter than all of that, stranger too. It is the image of the most feared man in the world, the most dominant boxer of his generation, a man who had terrified opponents and audiences alike for years. Crouched on the canvas of a boxing ring in Tokyo, Japan, in the early morning hours of February 11th, 1990, patting the floor with his gloves, searching, dazed, looking for his mouthpiece, the referee counting over him, and the world watching in stunned silence, realizing that the man they had believed was invincible was, in fact, just a man. Welcome. This is the Sleepy Biographer. Tonight we're moving through the life of Mike Tyson. Before we begin, if these slow journeys through history help you unwind, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. There's always another story waiting on the other side. Now, let's begin. Picture Las Vegas in the summer of 1997, June 28th. The MGM Grand Garden Arena, packed with more than 16,000 people who had paid a combined $31 million to be in that building. Tens of millions more watching on pay-per-view around the world. Nearly 2 million households, a record at the time. Outside, the Las Vegas Strip blazed and pulsed, as it always does, indifferent to what was about to happen. The fight was billed as The Sound and the Fury. It was a rematch. On one side, Evander Holyfield, a man from Atlanta, Georgia, deeply religious, disciplined, a fighter who had already shocked the boxing world by stopping Tyson in the 11th round 7 months earlier. On the other side, Mike Tyson, 30 years old, the man who had been, for years, the most feared heavyweight on the planet. Still a betting favorite, even after that first loss. Still dangerous. Imagine being in that arena. The noise is enormous. The lights are sharp and white. The ring gleams. 11 years of a career built on terror, built on speed and power, and a psychological dominance unlike anything boxing had seen since Ali had come down to this night. The early rounds went badly for Tyson. Holyfield was bigger, stronger, and fighting with something Tyson no longer had. Clarity, discipline, a game plan. During the second round, their heads collided. A cut opened above Tyson's right eye. Tyson complained to referee Mills Lane that Holyfield had headbutted him deliberately. Lane ruled it accidental. Tyson's frustration boiled. You could see it in his body. The way he moved, the way the old mechanical certainty had been replaced by something rawer and less controlled. And then the third round began. And this is where things get strange. Genuinely, historically strange. I want you to really picture this. What happened next was so jarring, so completely outside anything the sport had seen in living memory, that even people who were there described the first moments as a kind of collective confusion. People thought they had misread it. People thought the camera angle was wrong. Tyson and Holyfield clinched, and in that clinch, in that moment of pressed together bodies and tangled arms, Tyson turned his head and bit Evander Holyfield's right ear. Not a gesture, not a foul. A bite. Holyfield pulled back sharply and spun away, clutching the side of his head, reacting visibly, urgently, in pain and shock. The arena erupted in a noise that was part outrage, part confusion, part something no one quite had words for. Lane stopped the fight, checked Holyfield, penalized Tyson 2 points, and, astonishingly, allowed it to continue. It didn't continue for long, because 30 seconds later, Tyson bit Holyfield again, the other ear this time, and when Lane saw that second bite mark, he stopped the fight for good. Disqualification. The most decorated, most feared, most storied heavyweight of his generation, disqualified for biting. The post-fight scenes were unlike anything the sport had witnessed. Objects were thrown. Tyson and members of his entourage moved toward the crowd. Police poured in. A night that had started as a boxing match ended in something closer to pandemonium. Tyson's $30 million purse was withheld. His boxing license was revoked. He was fined $3 million. Evander Holyfield, who received 8 stitches for his ear, and later joked that the sight of his own reflection reminded him he had earned $35 million in 9 minutes, was gracious and measured. He did not use words like monster. He spoke of a man who had been overwhelmed by something inside himself. That moment, that third round, that bite, that spinning, bleeding Holyfield became the image the world remembered. Not the 20-year-old who had carried himself into the ring like something from a different era of human power. Not the boy from Brooklyn who had climbed from nothing. Just the bite. Just the chaos. Just the end of something that had once been extraordinary. But here is the thing about stories like this one. The moments we remember are only the last chapter. To understand what happened in that ring in Las Vegas in 1997, you have to go back much further. You have to go back to a street in Brooklyn, to a boy who couldn't read well and couldn't fight the right way and couldn't stop getting into trouble, to a man in a small gym above a police station in upstate New York who saw something in that boy that no one else had bothered to look for. We're going back to the beginning now. Brownsville, Brooklyn, the late 1960s and 1970s. If you want to understand Mike Tyson, really understand him, not just the fighter, but the person, you have to understand Brownsville, not as a place on a map, not as a data point in a sociology paper, but as a physical, lived sensory reality. The apartment buildings that rose up from treeless streets, the smell of asphalt in August, the sound of arguments through thin walls, the way poverty makes the world feel smaller than it is, closes it down, presses in from all sides, tells you that the street is where your life begins and ends. In the 1970s, Brownsville was regularly counted among the most dangerous neighborhoods in New York City, the highest incarceration rates in the 5 boroughs, among the highest rates of violent crime. The kind of place where children learned very early that the world was not especially interested in protecting them. Michael Gerard Tyson was born on June 30th, 1966, at Cumberland Hospital in Fort Greene, Brooklyn. He was the 3rd child of Lorna Smith Tyson. His father, Jimmy Kirkpatrick, was already gone. He had left the family before Mike was old enough to have a memory of him. He came and went, and then simply did not come back. So Lorna raised them alone. Rodney, the older brother, Denise, the sister, and Michael, the youngest, who was small for his age, who had a lisp, who spoke in a high voice that marked him immediately in a neighborhood where boys who seemed vulnerable were expected to suffer for it. Think about what that does to a child. Not a statistic, a child. A small boy with a lisp and no father, moving through streets where the unwritten rules are enforced physically, where weakness is an invitation, where learning to fight is not an elective, but a survival skill. That's the foundation, the weight of a childhood lived without safety. By the time he was 7, the family had settled at 178 Amboy Street in Brownsville proper. That address, 178 Amboy Street. It became famous later after everything else became famous. But in those years, it was just an apartment in a hard neighborhood, and a boy who had already been sexually abused by a stranger at that same age was learning what the world was made of. He started stealing, first small things, then larger ones. He joined a street gang called the Jolly Stompers. At 11 years old, the gang's older members would station him at cash registers while they held victims at gunpoint. He was the small one, the fast one, the one who could get in and out. By the time he was 13, he had been arrested somewhere between 30 and 40 times. His mother, Lorna, was an alcoholic who struggled to hold things together. She could not manage him. Nobody could manage him. In 1978, after an arrest for armed robbery, a judge sent him to the Tryon School for Boys in upstate New York, a reform school, a place where troubled boys were sent when the system did not know what else to do with them. And here is where the story begins to turn. At Tryon, there was a man named Bobby Stewart. Bobby Stewart was a counselor at the facility and a former professional boxer. He had fought on the undercard of the Rumble in the Jungle, the legendary 1974 fight in Zaire between Muhammad Ali and George Foreman. He was not a famous man. He was a man doing a job at a juvenile facility in upstate New York, quietly, without fanfare. But he had something to offer that no one else at that school had. And he recognized in the angry, explosive, still undirected boy named Michael Tyson something that most people never bothered to look for: raw talent, rare physical power, and underneath the fury, a desire to be good at something. Stewart began training him. He set conditions: behave yourself, attend your classes, earn it. And Tyson, who had never responded to rules in his life, responded to this one. He began shadowboxing in his cell at 3 and 4 in the morning. He read books about boxing. He was consumed. After a few months, Stewart recognized that he had taught the boy everything he knew, and he understood that the boy needed something more, needed a master, not a mentor. So he made a phone call. He called Cus D'Amato. What happened next was one of those quiet junctions in a life, one of those moments where a door opens that could just as easily have stayed shut, and everything afterward was different because someone bothered to open it. Constantine D'Amato was 70 years old. He had been one of the most celebrated boxing minds in America in the 1950s and 1960s. The man who trained and managed Floyd Patterson and Jose Torres, both world champions, both Boxing Hall of Famers. He had survived a long war with the corrupt boxing establishment of his era, had refused to let his fighters fall under the control of organized crime, and had paid for that refusal with years of professional exile. By the late 1970s, he was operating a small boxing club above the police station on Main Street in Catskill, New York, a quiet town on the Hudson River about 2 hours north of the city. Living in a Victorian house with a woman named Camille Ewald, who had given over her home to Cus's fighters and his vision. Cus D'Amato had seen everything boxing had to offer, and had grown old in its service. He had been largely forgotten. And then Bobby Stewart brought a 13-year-old boy from Brownsville into his gym, and Cus D'Amato watched him spar for less than 10 minutes. And he said, Tyson himself confirmed this, that the boy would be the youngest heavyweight champion in history. less than 10 minutes of sparring, and a 70-year-old man who had spent his life reading fighters saw something so clearly that he was willing to stake a prediction on it. He began training him. Tyson would come to Catskill on weekends at first, then longer stretches. D'Amato drilled him in the Peekaboo style, hands held high, close to the cheeks, defensive and aggressive at once, designed for a smaller heavyweight who needed to work inside to slip punches and explode with combinations from close range. He trained him with a numbered pad system, calling out sequences 1, 2, 3, and Tyson's body began to translate the calls into combinations with a mechanical speed that was genuinely alarming to see. But D'Amato also did something else, something perhaps more important than any punch combination or defensive technique. He talked to the boy every day, at length, about fear, about courage, about the nature of the champion's mind. Cus D'Amato believed deeply, almost philosophically, that the difference between a champion and an ordinary person was not talent. It was the ability to act in the presence of fear. He told Tyson that everyone was afraid, that fear was information, not a command, that the hero and the coward felt the same thing, but the hero did not let the feeling make his decisions. Those conversations gave Tyson something he had almost never had, a man who looked at him and saw a future worth building toward. When Lorna Tyson died of cancer in 1982, Mike was 16 years old. Cus D'Amato became his legal guardian. He moved into the Catskill house permanently. Camille Ewald cooked for him. Cus trained him. And in that Victorian house on the Hudson, a boy who had expected to spend his life cycling through arrest and release and arrest again began, slowly and with enormous difficulty, to become something else. The amateur career came first. Tyson competed in the Junior Olympics and won gold medals in 1981 and 1982. He was preparing for the 1984 Olympics, but he was cut from the team in a controversial decision. He lost a close qualifying fight to Henry Tillman in a result that many observers felt was wrongly scored. It was a blow, but he had Cus, and Cus did not believe in waiting. On March 6, 1985, Mike Tyson made his professional debut. He was 18 years old. His opponent was a journeyman heavyweight named Hector Mercedes. The fight lasted exactly 1 round. First round TKO. Gucci Desiree. The crowd, small but attentive, saw something in those 60 seconds that they would remember for a long time. He had 15 fights in his first professional year. 15. He won them all, most of them quickly. He won his first 19 fights by knockout, 12 of them in the first round. The heavyweight division suddenly had something new to talk about. Word was spreading through boxing circles, then out into the wider sports world. There was a kid from Brooklyn who was doing something unusual, something almost throwback, a heavyweight who moved like a middleweight, who punched like something that didn't have a clean comparison, who came out of the corner not walking, but almost running, cutting off angles, pressing, swarming, finishing things before they really began. Cus D'Amato called him the next heavyweight champion of the world so often and so confidently that it shifted from a prediction to a prophecy. He never saw it come true. On November 4th, 1985, Cus D'Amato died of pneumonia at Mount Sinai Hospital in Manhattan. He was 77 years old. Tyson was 19. He had been training professionally for less than a year. The grief was enormous and largely private. In interviews over the following years, Tyson would return again and again to D'Amato's death as the thing that changed everything, the before and the after, the dividing line in his life. Later, much later, some people who knew both of them would say it simply, Cus was the only person who could have kept Mike Tyson safe from himself, and when Cus died, the protection was gone, even if it took years for the consequences to make themselves visible. On November the 22nd, 1986, just over a year after Cus D'Amato's death, Mike Tyson walked into the ring at the Hilton Hotel in Las Vegas, Nevada, to fight Trevor Berbick for the World Boxing Council Heavyweight Championship. He was 20 years old, 4 months. He stopped Berbick in the second round. 20 years old, the youngest heavyweight champion in the history of the sport, a record that has never been broken. Cus had said he would do it, and he had done it, without Cus there to see it. The story goes that when the fight ended and Tyson held the belt, he looked up at the sky and thought of the old man. Over the next 14 months, Tyson completed a collection that no heavyweight in history had accomplished exactly as he did. In March 1987, he beat James Smith for the WBA heavyweight title. In August 1987, he beat Tony Tucker for the IBF heavyweight title. And just like that, for the first time in boxing history, a single heavyweight held the WBA, the WBC, and the IBF titles simultaneously. Not separately, not by some complicated set of agreements, all three at once, undisputed. He was 21 years old. The boxing world ran out of comparisons. The old writers reached for Ali and Liston and Jack Johnson and Joe Louis and came back saying the same thing. There was no clean comparison. Tyson was doing something new. The speed was unprecedented for a heavyweight. The power was there. Great heavyweights always had power, but the combination of speed and power and the peekaboo shell and the psychological devastation he inflicted on opponents before the first punch was even thrown, that combination was his own. He wore black trunks, black shoes, no socks, no robe. He walked to the ring wearing a plain white towel around his neck like a prize fighter from a previous century. No music, no spectacle, no entrance theater. Just a man going to work. And somehow the absence of all that ceremony made the whole thing more frightening. Not less. It said, I don't need any of that, you'll be impressed when it's over. In January 1988, Larry Holmes, 4 rounds. A heavyweight legend knocked down, not getting back up. In June 1988, Michael Spinks, undefeated, former IBF champion, the whole boxing world watching. Tickets at extraordinary prices, 2 undefeated heavyweights, the biggest boxing match in years. The fight lasted 91 seconds. 91 seconds. Spinks was knocked out before the crowd had fully settled into their seats. The New York Times ran a headline asking whether there was anyone left to fight him. The year was 1988. Tyson was 21, then 22. He had more money than he could count. He had more fame than he knew how to hold. He was, by any objective measure, at the top of the world. And the cracks were already there, invisible from the outside, but there. The press conferences were performances in their own right. Tyson would walk in and the room would change. The experienced boxing writers who had covered 100 press conferences would notice it. A particular quality of attention, a held-breath quality that wasn't present for other fighters. He would sit across from an opponent and simply look at them, not with aggression, not with theater, just look. And the opponent would start talking, would start explaining himself, would fill the silence, because silence in that direction felt too dangerous to leave alone. He once told a reporter in one of his more reflective moments, "Everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth." That line became famous, quoted everywhere, used as a metaphor for business, for politics, for life. But in its original context, it was simply a description of the basic mechanism of his destruction of other fighters, the way the carefully constructed pre-fight strategy dissolved the instant his fist connected. There were stories, many stories, of fighters whose legs were shaking before they even stepped into the ring. Men who had beaten other elite heavyweights, who believed themselves to be serious challengers, who walked into the arena and felt, somewhere in the animal part of the brain, that they were in a category of danger different from the one they had prepared for. Think about the geometry of how he moved. Not straight forward, but at angles, bobbing low, then rising, always moving so the target was never quite where it appeared to be. 5 feet 11 inches and 210 pounds. Fighting with the leverage of a man who understood that size in boxing was less about inches and more about timing and the willingness to get close when everything in the nervous system is telling you to stay back. Fear is its own kind of weapon, and Tyson had learned that lesson directly from Cus D'Amato, who had spent years teaching him that the psychological battle was won or lost before a single punch was thrown. For a few years, nobody could defend against it. The personal life had been quietly, persistently unraveling in ways the public did not yet fully understand. In March 1987, Tyson had begun dating Robin Givens, an actress known for her role in the ABC sitcom Head of the Class. She was beautiful, educated, charming, from a world very different from Brownsville and Catskill and reform schools. They married on February 7th, 1988, in Chicago. 8 months later, the marriage was over. What happened inside that marriage is a matter of competing accounts that have never been fully resolved. What the public saw, directly and undeniably, was a September 1988 interview on ABC's 2020, in which Robin Givens sat next to Tyson on a couch and described life with him as torture. She said it was pure hell. She said she was frightened. And throughout the interview, Tyson sat beside her, nodding slowly, saying almost nothing, his face expressionless in a way that made everything more unsettling. Givens filed for divorce in October 1988. The split cracked something open. In the months that followed, Tyson fired Kevin Rooney, his trainer, his last direct connection to the world Cus D'Amato had built for him. Don King, the notorious boxing promoter who had been circling Tyson's career for years, was moving closer to the center of operations. James Jacobs, his co-manager, had already died of leukemia in March 1988. Jacobs had been a boxing historian, an intellectual, a man who had helped preserve some of what Cus had built. He was gone. Cus was gone. Jacobs was gone. Rooney was gone. And in their place was Don King. Not the version people usually tell. This part I find genuinely staggering. The speed of it, how quickly the whole architecture came apart. Don King, a man from Cleveland, Ohio, convicted of manslaughter in 1967. A man who had emerged from prison with a remarkable facility for promotion and an instinct for attaching himself to the most valuable fighters in the world and collecting a share of their earnings that many of those fighters later disputed in court. A man with a shock of impossibly upright white hair and a vocabulary that was part preacher, part con artist, part carnival barker, and all calculation. As long as Cus was alive, Cus had kept King at a distance. But Cus was dead. and Tyson, 22 years old and unmoored, chose King. The financial arrangements that followed are the subject of a $100 million lawsuit. Tyson alleged King had skimmed millions from his purses over years. King denied it. The settlement, $14 million to Tyson in 2004, resolved the legal question without establishing the factual one. What is not in dispute is this. By the time Tyson's career was over, the man who had earned $300 million was $23 million in debt, and Don King was not. The fight was announced for February 11, 1990. Tokyo, Japan, the Tokyo Dome. The opponent was James Buster Douglas, a heavyweight from Columbus, Ohio, who was talented, and everyone agreed he was talented, but who had a well-documented history of failing to apply that talent when the pressure was real. He had lost fights he shouldn't have lost. He had quit. Even people who liked him had stopped expecting very much. The Mirage Casino in Las Vegas made Tyson a 42-1 favorite. Not 42%, 42-1. For every $1 you bet on Douglas, you would win 42 if he somehow won. It was not a number that reflected the possibility of an actual competition. It was a number that reflected an expected formality. Douglas was there to lose. But something had happened to Buster Douglas that nobody had absorbed as fully as they should have. His mother, Lula Pearl Douglas, the woman who had pushed him harder than anyone, who had always believed in him more than he believed in himself, had died 23 days before the fight. He was carrying her into that ring. He was fighting for something that none of Tyson's preparation had anticipated. And Tyson was not prepared, not even close. By the accounts of people in his camp, by his own later admissions, Tyson had barely trained. He had spent part of the pre-fight period in his hotel room, isolated, apparently watching a video collection called Faces of Death. The night before the fight, singer Bobby Brown was reportedly with him, and when Brown urged him to get some sleep, Tyson waved him off. Douglas was an amateur, he said. There was nothing to prepare for. The fight began at 9 in the morning in Tokyo, a Japanese crowd, polite and reserved by boxing standards, a quiet for such a momentous occasion. Douglas boxed beautifully. He had a 12-inch reach advantage and he used it, keeping Tyson at the end of long jabs, moving laterally, refusing to stand still and be hit. In the early rounds, Tyson looked slow, slower than anyone had seen him look. The pressure that had broken other men seemed, against Douglas, almost manageable. The 8th round arrived. Tyson caught Douglas with a thunderous uppercut and knocked him down. It looked, for one moment, like the script had reasserted itself, like the inevitable had finally arrived. Douglas got up at a count of 9. The count stood. The fight continued. And in the 10th round, 35 seconds in, Buster Douglas unleashed an uppercut that traveled from somewhere near the canvas to connect with Tyson's chin. He followed it with a 4-punch combination. Tyson went down for the first time in his professional career. And there it was, that image. The most feared man on the planet crawling on the canvas, one hand sweeping the floor, looking for his mouthpiece. The referee counting. The arena barely making a sound. Douglas standing in a neutral corner, chest heaving, looking out at the crowd with an expression of pure disbelief that matched the disbelief in every living room and bar and sports venue in the world that was watching. The count reached 10. Tyson did not beat it. In every conversation that followed, in the years and decades that accumulated after that morning in Tokyo, Tyson himself would return to this fight as the real end. Not the rape conviction, not the prison sentence, not the ear bite. My career, he said years later, has been over since 1990. He knew it that morning on the floor of the Tokyo Dome, even if the world would spend another 7 years watching the evidence accumulate. He fought 4 more times before the walls came fully down. He beat Donovan Ruddock twice in 1991, both fights competitive, both revealing something that had not been visible before. Tyson was not the same fighter. He could be hurt, he could be made uncomfortable, he could be pushed. And then, in July 1991, at the Indiana Black Expo in Indianapolis, he attended a rehearsal for the Miss Black America pageant, and he met an 18-year-old contestant named Desiree Washington, Miss Black, Rhode Island. What happened in the early morning hours of July 19th in room 606 of the Canterbury Hotel is a matter that was decided in a court of law, and the law found Mike Tyson guilty. On February 10th, 1992, a jury in Indianapolis found Mike Tyson guilty of rape and 2 counts of criminal deviant conduct. In March of that year, he was sentenced to 10 years, with 4 suspended. He would serve his time at the Indiana Youth Center in Plainfield, Indiana. He was 25 years old. The man who had held every heavyweight title in the world, the youngest heavyweight champion in history, was going to prison. Tyson maintained his innocence consistently and has maintained it since. The appeal was denied. The Supreme Court declined to hear the case. What he found inside was, by various accounts, something unexpected. He studied. He read voraciously, history, philosophy, literature. He went through Hemingway and Tolstoy and Machiavelli. He developed an interest in the history of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar and Napoleon, military men of conquest who had made themselves into legends and then, in various ways, exhausted their own formulas. He found in their stories a mirror he hadn't known he was looking for. He converted to Islam and took the name Malik Abdul Aziz. The faith gave him structure, a framework for daily life that had nothing to do with boxing and nothing to do with money. Some people found the conversion cynical. People who knew him better suggested it was genuine. Either way, it was a man reaching for something to hold. He was released on parole on March 25, 1995. He had served 3 years. The comeback was fast, aggressive, profitable. In August 1995, 5 months after his release, Tyson knocked out Peter McNeely in 89 seconds. Not because McNeely was a serious opponent, but the pay-per-view buy rate was enormous regardless. The world wanted to see if Tyson was still Tyson. He won the WBC heavyweight title in March 1996, stopping Frank Bruno. Then in September 1996, he knocked out Bruce Seldon to win the WBA belt. 2 titles back, the return narrative was fully operational. The mystique was being carefully reconstructed, fight by fight, press conference by press conference. But the mystique had a ceiling now, and Evander Holyfield proved it. Nobody expected Holyfield to win. Holyfield was 34 years old and had been saying for years that he was not afraid of any man who was not God. Everybody who heard that in boxing circles appreciated it as a sentiment and then went back to their handicapping. Tyson was installed as a heavy favorite. On November 9th, 1996, Holyfield took Tyson apart. Not dramatically, not in a single devastating exchange. He took him apart methodically and professionally, hitting him with shots that moved his head, working the body, demonstrating throughout 11 rounds that Tyson, without the total psychological dominance, without the terrifying forward momentum, without the opponent already beaten in his own mind before the first bell, was a skilled but limited heavyweight who could be figured out. In the 11th round, referee Mitch Halpern stopped it. Tyson had never been stopped before, had never been knocked out before. The Douglas loss had felt like an aberration. This was different. This was a disciplined fighter demonstrating over 11 rounds that Tyson could be beaten, that the formula existed, that the fear was manageable. The rematch was set for June 28, 1997, and we know how that ended. We already know. The bite, the chaos, the disqualification, the end of something that had once been great and had become, by that night, a tragic imitation of itself. After Las Vegas, things moved in one direction. In 1998, Tyson was arrested in Maryland after a road rage incident. He continued fighting. He was still a draw, still capable of filling arenas through some combination of genuine ability and the morbid fascination that surrounds a man in visible freefall. But the victories were against men he would once have dismissed without a second thought, and the losses mounted. The finances had been collapsing for years. $300 million. That is the rough estimate of what Mike Tyson earned during his career. From purses, endorsements, pay-per-view shares, a fortune that should have lasted generations. And it flowed out at rates that were nearly as fast. The house in Farmington, Connecticut, a 52-room mansion, complete with a ballroom, a swimming pool, a custom nightclub, and at one point 2 Bengal tigers who roamed the property. The tigers alone cost tens of thousands of dollars a year in food, veterinary care, and liability coverage. One of them attacked a trespasser who broke into the property at night and was severely injured. The tigers eventually went to an animal sanctuary. The cars, the jewelry, the entourage. At the peak, dozens of people who traveled with him, were paid by him, ate at his expense, lived in the economic shadow of his earnings. Some of them were genuine friends. Many were people who would not have been there without the money, and who departed quietly as the money shrank. By 2003, he was bankrupt. $23 million in debt. Every asset, the houses, the cars, the art, liquidated or leveraged or gone. And this is where things get strange again. One of the details cited in the bankruptcy filings, the one that journalists could not resist, was the $400,000 a year he was spending maintaining a flock of pet pigeons, an interest that had begun in Brownsville when he was a boy, the one connection to his childhood that had followed him into the heights of fame, and then followed him right back down. $400,000 a year for pigeons. But those pigeons were from before everything, from the streets, from the boy who had nothing else to tend, that he kept spending on them even when it was absurd, was not stupidity. It was attachment. It was the last thread back. On June 11th, 2005, Mike Tyson fought Kevin McBride in Washington, D.C. The fight lasted 7 rounds. After the 7th, Tyson sat on his stool and did not get up. He retired from the fight while sitting down. He was 38 years old. He said afterward, "I don't have the heart for this anymore." He said his career had been over since 1990. He said he no longer had anything to prove and could no longer pretend otherwise. He walked out of the arena and into whatever the rest of his life was going to be. In March 2009, Tyson's 4-year-old daughter Exodus died after accidentally strangling herself on a treadmill cord at her mother's home in Phoenix. The loss was devastating in a way that moved even people who had written him off entirely. He spoke about it with Oprah Winfrey later that year, about the initial rage he felt, about the gratitude he had for having tools from his time in recovery to move through that rage without destruction. "I don't know how she died," he said, "and I don't want to know." He had been in and out of drug rehabilitation programs for years, cocaine, alcohol. The details were public and messy and consistent with a man who had never found a reliable way to manage what was inside him. The money was gone, the titles were gone. The people who had been around him at the peak, most of them gone. What he had left was himself, whatever that was, whatever it could become. And here is the part of the story that gets less attention than the fall. Not because it's more dramatic, it isn't, but because it matters. He rebuilt, slowly, imperfectly, incompletely, he rebuilt. He got sober, not once, not in a single dramatic turning point, but in the grinding, backsliding, frustrating, gradual way that people actually get sober, over years of work and relapse and recommitment and more work. He found sobriety not as an event, but as a practice, the same way Cus had taught him that virtue was not a destination, but a daily decision. He collaborated with Spike Lee on a one-man show called Mike Tyson, Undisputed Truth, in which he stood alone on a stage for 2 hours and talked about everything. Brownsville, Cus, the championships, the rape conviction, the ear bite, the money, the children, the terror, and the loneliness of all of it. The show went to Broadway in 2012. By most accounts, it was extraordinary, not because it was exculpatory, but because it was honest, in a way that public figures in crisis rarely allow themselves to be. There is a particular kind of courage in standing on a stage and describing your own destruction without the protection of distance or irony. The things he said about the violence, the loneliness, what it felt like to be a world champion and have no one around who actually loved him, about the grief for Cus he had never fully processed, about the daughter he lost. Those things landed as testimony, as a man saying, "This is what happened. I am still here, and I am not pretending it was anything other than what it was." In 2013, he published a memoir, Undisputed Truth, which became a New York Times bestseller. He became, in some genuine sense, a more thoughtful public figure than he had ever been at the peak of his power, more reflective, more aware of his own damage, more willing to sit with discomfort without fighting his way out of it. His third wife, Kiki Tyson, whom he married in 2009, became something Tyson himself described as the most stabilizing presence of his adult life. He spoke about her in ways he had never spoken about anyone, with a quality of gratitude that felt hard-won, the kind of gratitude that only comes from knowing, viscerally, what its absence costs. He launched a cannabis company, Tyson 2.0. He started a podcast, Hotboxin' with Mike Tyson, that featured him in conversation in a way that was noticeably different from his public persona for most of his career. Curious, engaged, willing to ask questions and actually listen to the answers. He reconnected with Evander Holyfield, the man whose ear he had bitten, and the two men became, in their later years, something close to friends. They even collaborated on a product together, ear-shaped cannabis gummies, shaped like bitten ears, which was either the most audacious business idea in the history of sports, or a profound act of mutual forgiveness packaged as commerce, possibly both. Holyfield, presenting at the Boxing Hall of Fame in 2017, had Mike Tyson as his presenter. The same man who bit his ear in 1997 handed him his trophy in 2017 and called it a privilege and a high honor. That sentence alone contains more human complexity than most biographies. In November 2024, at the age of 58, he fought Jake Paul in a professional exhibition bout in Arlington, Texas. He lost by unanimous decision, but he showed up. He stood in a ring. He was still Mike Tyson, whatever that had come to mean. In May 2025, he returned to Catskill, the little town on the Hudson where Cus D'Amato had first put gloves on his hands, where Camille Ewald had cooked for him in that Victorian house, where the gym above the police station had been the first safe place he had ever known. To speak at Catskill High School about a scholarship established in Cus D'Amato's name. He told a room full of students that moving to Catskill was the best thing that ever happened to him, He said without Cus, without Bobby Stewart, he'd have been a kid in Brooklyn, and if he was lucky, he wouldn't be in jail. He sounded like a man who had come home, or at least like a man who finally understood what home had meant, now that enough time had passed to see it clearly. Before you drift, hold this story in your mind for a moment. What is it that we are actually looking at when we look at Mike Tyson? What is the story? Is it a story about talent destroyed by circumstance? About what happens when a boy who needed extraordinary amounts of care and structure and love, and found it briefly in the form of an old man in a gym above a police station in upstate New York, was left to navigate the world without it? About how fragile the architecture of a great career can be when the foundation is grief and rage and survival instinct rather than stability. Is it a story about the machinery that surrounds a champion, the promoters and managers and hangers-on, the financial systems that process extraordinary human talent and often leave the talent itself with nothing but the wreckage? Is it a story about accountability? About a man convicted of rape who served his time and maintained his innocence, and who deserves, as all people do, the complexity of his own humanity, while also requiring that we hold in our minds, clearly and without flinching, that Desiree Washington was real, that her account was believed by a jury, and that the people who were harmed in all of this were not just abstract categories? It is all of those stories, all of those things at once. History does not simplify human beings. It accumulates them layer by layer, contradiction resting on contradiction, until what you have is not a symbol, but a person. Cus D'Amato used to say that a boy comes to him in fear and leaves as a champion, not because the fear is gone, but because he learned to act in spite of it. He believed that was the only courage worth having, the kind that doesn't deny the fear, but refuses to be ruled by it. For a few years, in white trunks and black shoes with no socks, Mike Tyson was the clearest demonstration of that principle that boxing had ever produced. Then the fear found other channels. Then the rage that had always been underneath the discipline, the rage that Brownsville and poverty and abandonment had assembled piece by piece, found its way back to the surface. Then the boy from Amboy Street was back, without the gym, without Cus, without the framework that had given the fury a direction. The whole thing, the rise, the peak, the collapse, took about 15 years, from the day Bobby Stewart first put sparring gloves on a 13-year-old boy in a juvenile facility in upstate New York, to the morning Mike Tyson sat on a stool in Washington, D.C. and could not make himself stand up. 15 years. A career that rewrote the record books and filled arenas across the world and generated hundreds of millions of dollars, and ended with a man sitting still and knowing it was over. Carry the story gently. History is rarely the story we expect it to be. The greatest fighter of his generation was not undone by a greater fighter. He was undone by the same things that undo most people: isolation, grief, and the absence of the people who made us capable of being our best selves. A boy who had spent his entire childhood without safety found himself at the peak of his power, still without safety, just surrounded by a different kind of danger, one measured in money and excess and the company of people who needed him to keep winning. The most remarkable thing about the long aftermath, the sobriety, the one-man show, the memoir, the pigeon farm, the late-night podcast conversations, all of it, is that he kept going. He kept showing up. He faced the crowd, year after year, knowing what they were remembering when they looked at him. And he showed up anyway. Maybe that is its own kind of courage. Imperfect, complicated, impossible to fully separate from the damage he caused along the way, but present, still standing, Sleep well tonight. Let the story settle into you the way good stories do, not as a lesson, not as a verdict, but as a reminder that human beings are more than their worst moments and more than their best ones, that what we carry from childhood follows us further than we expect, that sometimes the most remarkable thing a person can do is simply to still be here, still reckoning, still trying. If tonight's journey helped you unwind, we'd love it if you'd like the video and consider subscribing to the Sleepy Biographer. There's always another story waiting. Good night.